Okay, so the question is, what am I interested in? What are my theories on reality? What are my interests in the world of now? So as a simple starting point, I see reality through the limited lens of a human mind, a human brain, and the studies of others who have studied the physical world that we call physics. And to connect to that is science. Science is really the study of reality. So the sort of the reality beyond the physical would be the non-physical, but that's a pretty broad idea. And as humans, we sit somewhere between the physical and the non-physical. So from this physical brain, this physical body, we have a sensation of touch and smell and hearing and sight and the visceral experiences of being a human, the senses. And then beyond that, then we have the experience of mind. So mind comes from this human brain that gives us structure around thought by having language, and language is the consequence of having a stretched larynx, which if we did not have the stretched larynx, we would not be able to make this complex sound that we can make that gives us the ability to communicate complex words, complex ideas from my mind into your mind. This is an extraordinary feat for humans to be able to engage with. Now, somewhere along the way, we have also gained some experience of what we would call consciousness, sentience, this self-awareness, driven primarily by the prefrontal cortex, which enables this thought machine to be able to observe itself and contextualize itself. And that gives rise to this strange experience of being able to observe the thoughts, observe the body, and observe that one is not exactly entirely those things. Now, through meditation and hallucinogenic drugs, one is able to experience a higher dimensional state that leads us to the logical conclusion that consciousness, or the source of consciousness, is not a three-dimensional or even a four-dimensional, but a much higher dimensional source, and that through meditation we are able to move up and down through the layers of dimensional reality like an elevator, moving up and down through through these dimensions. And again, we sit somewhere between that, somewhere between the higher dimensions and the lower dimensions, and we have an experience that is not specifically one or the other, but it can be dominated by the lower dimensions. It can be pulled into the lower dimensions. It can be pulled towards hunger, towards fear, towards desire, towards sex, towards anything that is much more of this material world that we experience. And equally, one can also get pulled towards the higher dimensional experiences, pulls, desires, if that's the right word. If one was to go and spend a long period of time only meditating, only exploring the higher dimensional realities that are available from the source of consciousness, then one could become much more dominated by those forces, by those compulsions, by those experiences. And it's not really that we need to worry about either one. We don't need to focus primarily just on the physical, or focus primarily just on the spiritual, or the non-physical. But it's important to understand that this is a part of the structure of our reality that enables us to then go, oh, I can move up and down through this and play a bit. Then we get to free will. So, humans evolved as this universe has evolved, although I suppose evolution is a specific process to do with the passing of information through time imperfectly, which allows for this process that we call natural selection. So this replication of information through DNA, because it happens imperfectly, therefore there is the possibility for variation, and therefore there is the possibility for some direction of preference of shape or style or design to be preferred over another design based on external factors, such as an environmental change, a change in oxygen, a change in temperature, a change in availability of resources. And this then, over many billions of years, has arrived at, even though it's not arriving anywhere, it is just a continual flow of passing of information through time. But for us humans, we consider it to have arrived somewhere because we feel that we are a bit unusual, a bit special, and frankly, we are a bit unusual. In the sense that it doesn't seem like a life form on this planet has been able to be so manipulative of its environment, so omni-environment, that it can go and live in the very coldest, it can live in all sorts of different spaces, it can eat all sorts of different foods, it can build all sorts of different structures, it can even build structures where it can transport itself to deep into the ocean and far up into the sky, even into space, bring with it machines that enable it to breathe, bring with it machines that enable it to manipulate its temperature and pressure environment so that it can maintain itself in those environments. That's a very unusual thing. So humans sit somewhere in the journey of history, not at the very beginning, not at the very end. We just sit on this now, this ever-moving now. And the now seems to be, for us anyway, the most poignant, most important, most singularly relevant part of existence. It doesn't really matter how much time there was going backwards. It doesn't really matter how much time there possibly is going forwards. It doesn't matter how long it's taken for evolution to have got here. It doesn't matter really what happened 100, 1,000, 100,000 years ago. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow, the week after, or 100,000 years into the future. The only thing that really matters is what is happening right now. This single moment that is ever moving, but you only ever find yourself in moments. You do not find yourself in decades, in years, in days. You do not find yourself living out a single minute. What do you find yourself living out? You just find yourself living out perpetual nows. What is this now? This now is the conglomeration of many parts of energy, frequency, vibration. It would be wrong to say that I am one thing, but also it would be incorrect to say that I'm everywhere. I might be the consequence of all things going backwards in time as far as you can possibly imagine to the Big Bang and beyond. And I might also be the consequence of things going forwards in time until as far as you can possibly imagine. And given that there is a quantum connection between quantum particles, the connection is really as far and spread wide as you can possibly imagine. And therefore, if in this single moment I have some control, that control is consequential across all of time and space in every direction, and I am also affected by everybody else's control, whatever control they have, in all directions across time and space. So in one moment I can think that I'm very small, very insignificant, and just some tiny speck in this vast cosmos of energetic flow, and I'm not really anything. I'm not a single person, I'm not a single human, I'm not a single life form, because I'm just part of some soup. And yet at the same time, I experience this thing that we call a now, and I feel like I have some influence over that now. Now let's explore that influence. This is what we call free will. I have very little influence. I have very little that is within my control. In fact, almost everything is outside of my control. I did not design my genetics. I did not choose my parents. I did not choose the period in history that I'd be born in, the country I'd fall out of another human into, therefore the passport I'd be given, the currency I'd be given, the kind of jobs that are available in that era, the kind of foods that's available, the kind of TV that's available, whatever is going on in the world that I've interacted with. I can't really say that I manifested it. It just was there. Maybe there were a vast number of options, but still a somewhat finite number of options. If I was born in the 1800s, there would not be a mobile phone to play with. If I was born in, the early 2000s, there would not be an iPhone to play with. But if I was born in 2015, then there's the option of an iPhone. Doesn't mean that I have an iPhone. Maybe I use a Samsung. Maybe I didn't have a phone at all. Maybe I lived in a very poor part of Africa somewhere where I just didn't have access to those things. But either way, you arrive somewhere, you arrive to a certain family, you arrive to a certain time, you arrive to a certain country, a different gender, a different social construct that means something around what gender, what age, what race, all those things. All these things outside of my control. People I can't control. My emotions I can't control. My body reactions to food and microbes and the sun I cannot control. So what can I control? Well, I might feel like I make decisions. But even those, what is a decision? A decision is the next action that takes place based on all of the inputs that have come in up until then, all the experiences that have gone on until then, and as a result there's a likely next choice. This has been looked at through experiments, and what is really has been observed is that the choice that you make, the choice that you feel that you make, was already made before you think you made it. So even the action of making decisions doesn't seem to really be something that you do. Okay. So actually, the decision-making process is actually something your brain does. So your brain, your body, and all the variables that go into it, such as I've just had a Coca-Cola, or I've just seen a certain movie, or I've just had an argument with my wife, will result in a different decision. So all of these things go into the decision. So it's not to say that the decision is completely predetermined. Maybe like billiard balls on the universe colliding, incredibly complex, incredibly chaotic. So sure, in theory, if you could map out the entirety of the universe at point A, you could predict what would happen 1 second later, 1 second later, 1 second later. Truthfully, it's too chaotic to think that you could do that, but let's say with perfect estimation, with perfect modeling, one in theory could do that. And whether you can or can't, it doesn't really matter. The point is it's not within your control. So these decisions, even if they are influenced by all sorts of variables that are not within your control, that means there's some fairly large amount of chaos and some fairly large amount of unpredictability. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have any more control over it just because it's not determined. So again, what do you do? So you are in there somewhere, and this is maybe the main task for a human, is to reconcile the reality that we live in. Don't try and make it otherwise. Don't fight against, don't want it to be a certain way, just try and see exactly how it is. So this is how it is. The scenario is that you are here. You are having an experience. You are experiencing some thoughts, some sensations. Maybe there is some discomfort on the thoughts you're having. Maybe there is some discomfort in your body. Maybe there is some pleasure. Maybe there is some joy. I don't know. You didn't create that joy or create that displeasure or to create that guilt or create that thought, or no, it just happened, and you didn't create the concept of a human. You didn't create the concept of thoughts. You didn't create the concepts of guilt or joy or any of these things. They are some occurrence, and you are somehow aware of this occurrence. But you're a little bit more than just aware. You are intimately engaged in. You are intimately experiencing. You are not experiencing the person next to you. You're not experiencing what your child is experiencing. You're not experiencing what your parent is experiencing. You're experiencing what you're experiencing. This single shape, this single body. And as each moment comes and goes, it doesn't really come and go at all. It just continues. There's a continuation of nows. What is it that you do? Where is it that you reside? This free will. What is this free will that you have? Okay, let's put out some possibilities. I can't give certainties on this, but some possibilities. It seems that you have some ability to either squeeze a little bit tighter around that moment, grab at it, or push it away. It's the same kind of energy. Tightness. You can add some extra level of tightness, and vice versa. You can slightly release, slightly allow, slightly let go, let be in that moment. So this seems to be really the critical structure of free will that you have. And as you tighten, you move a bit closer to the physical. And as you release, you move a little bit further away from the physical and a little bit more into the non-physical. So actually what happens the moment that you release, you can imagine that you have a sphere of awareness. And this sphere of awareness is dictated, the size of that sphere is dictated by the amount of tension that you are experiencing in this moment. So if you're experiencing a large amount of tension, a large amount of fear or pain, or even excitement is also a kind of tension, then your sphere of awareness will be very small, which means that your sphere of awareness, that sensation of being that you have, will be very dominated by this physical world, this physical sensations, these physical, they're not exactly physical thoughts, but the thoughts come from your physical mind, so you're dominated by those, or your emotions. And therefore you might be dominated by the stories of your mind, the stories of, oh, that person, I want to do better than them. I feel bad about what they've said. I feel bad about what I said. Or, I'm so happy about myself. I'm so proud of myself. All of these things, these are all part of this physical world. But the moment you release, the moment you somehow release some of this tension, ever so slightly, your sphere of awareness gets a little bit bigger, and now you find that you are now observing those emotions, observing those thoughts, observing these stories that are running in your mind. This is what we call meditation. So meditation is the consequence of something you did. Or to put it a bit more cutely and a bit more accurately, it's something you didn't do. This release. This release is an action of inaction, allowing. So instead of being tight, there's softness, lightness. In this lightness, there is expansion. In this expansion, there is now a new perspective. This larger state of awareness is now able to perceive the more physical elements. Really, for mind, but for this sake, we'll talk about that as being a bit more of a physical element, because its source is from the physical. So meditation is not something that you necessarily do. It's not an action. It is the consequence of inaction. But it's not a kind of laziness inaction. It's an intentional release, surrender, allowing. So this really seems to be the crux of free will. The crux of free will is this single activity that you can do in the ever-passing moments of allowing. And then the consequence is observing. Now what you've done in that observing is you've now given your mind some new perspective, some new information. Now your mind is in this present moment. It's observing what is in this present moment. Your mind is always in the present moment, but your awareness, the self-referential part of your mind from the prefrontal cortex, is now able to engage and observe what's going on, and you now give it more information. Something I would often say to people is that don't get too worked up on doing the right thing or not, on figuring it all out or not. The only activity that you really need to do is meditate, is to observe. How do you observe? You release. What is the consequence of releasing? Now you're observing in the real moment. In the moment, you are seeing the thoughts that are happening, the experiences that are happening from a slightly further away position. Maybe to begin with, it's not that far away, but the more you allow, the more you allow, the more you allow, the further away you get, and the calmer that becomes, a calmer perspective. But either way, whatever you do, just by observing what is happening in the present moment, you will gain information. You'll gain information about the consequence of this happened, oh, and this happened, and this happened, oh, because that happened. When I drank that Coca-Cola, I then had that spike, and then I had that down. When I drank that coffee, I had that spike, and then I had that down. You start to see it. You start to see the patterns, or at least your mind starts to see the patterns. And then eventually what your mind will conclude is whatever it concludes. Your mind is clever. So again, don't worry about you being clever. You don't need to be anything. You're not really anything anyway. You are just the sort of the substance that sits in between all of these things that you have no control over. You did not invent your thoughts, you did not invent the Coca-Cola bottle, you did not invent the consequence of drinking Coca-Cola, or you did not invent the desire to have Coca-Cola, or all of these things. But if you allow yourself to observe more and more and more in the present moment what is happening, what is really happening, eventually your mind will go, oh, that Coca-Cola is fucking bad news, man. Right? And then you'll go, oh no, okay, yeah. Eventually, you know, you'll drink another 1,000 bottles of Coca-Cola, and you'll observe yourself have the desire to drink the Coca-Cola, and you'll think, oh, that's interesting. Why yeah, you'll see what it was about. You'll see why you wanted it. What was that about? And then you'll see the consequence afterwards, afterwards, all those things, and eventually maybe then you reach that Coca-Cola bottle, all the same things, and then before it gets to your lips, you just go, nah. And that doesn't even need to be you who's doing that. That's just your brain. Your brain figured it out. So your brain figures all sorts of shit out. And all you have to do is help it pay more attention. How do you help it pay more attention? You slightly release the grip that you have on life, and now your mind is able to observe in a slightly less stressed state, and then it will make better decisions. So this is the way that you make better decisions. The way you make better decisions is by observing yourself more often. How do you observe yourself more often? Is you release. This activity of meditation is really a non-activity. This is the whole essence of what I'm trying to share here, and that is the essence of free will. Now there is a few other elements to free will that we could try and throw in, and let's see what you think. And you don't have to take any of this as absolute truth. These are all things for you to go and explore for yourself. I'm not talking about something abstract that's far away that you can never go and explore. Like if I was telling you about a black hole, there's no way that you can really go and corroborate. You know, you can't go and poke a black hole and go, oh no, it doesn't behave the way that you said, or doesn't look what you said it was going to look like, or actually I went into a black hole and I didn't spaghettify, I did something else altogether. It's very unlikely you'll ever get the opportunity to do that. But what I'm talking about is something that you have an intimate availability of testing. You have the best tool that anyone has ever invented to test. You actually, there's nothing, you know, we can't create an experiment in a lab. We can't create a tool that can do this test better than you can. You have all the tools available. So everything I say, you can go and experiment for yourself, and then you discover either, yeah, that guy was talking utter bullshit, I have a completely different idea, great, very good, enjoy that new idea. Or you go, yeah, sure, yeah, that's about right, man, or whatever. Doesn't matter, I don't care. I'm not even very sort of stuck on these ideas for myself. I just, you know, whatever. I've just carried on observing, and this is what my brain has kind of come up with as an estimation of those thoughts. So I didn't come up with these thoughts. I just carried on observing, and my brain came up with these thoughts, right? Okay, so we've got this release. So there's three elements. A-I-R, air, whatever, doesn't matter. So one is awareness. So we've already done that. That's just having this awareness. One is intention. So intention, awareness, and release. So release, we've covered. That is you have this ability to either squeeze tighter or loosen up. And the consequence of the tightening or the releasing is awareness, the sphere of awareness. So these two are tightly entwined. And then the third one is intention. So intention is really this, let's say, the moving of the flashlight. So you have this flashlight of awareness. Yes, there is a size to the awareness, but there is also a direction of where you point your focus of awareness. And really, wherever you point the focus of awareness is where your intention goes. So if you direct your full awareness towards some study, some person, some activity, some beautiful thing, then that is where your awareness goes. And the consequence of that is that is where your mind goes. That is where your body goes, your desire goes. So you are somewhat responsible for directing this flow of now. So one way of looking at this now that you're in is that there are a near infinite number of paths that are available into the future, the next action, the next flow. And you are going to move down a single path. You only ever move down single paths. Now, obviously, there aren't actually an infinite number of paths. Well, there are some limited number of paths because, you're not suddenly going to turn into a giraffe. You're not suddenly going to turn into a basketball. You're not suddenly going to age from 3 years old to 90 years old. So there is some logical progression of the material and the logical causality nature of this universe. And yet at the same time, there are a fairly large, let's say almost infinite number of directions that you could travel down every single moment, depending on where your awareness is focused. Because based on that different focus of awareness, then your mind will be different. And if your mind is different 1 second later, then it will be different the second after that and the second after that, because now there is a new array of possibilities. So let's give the example of a thought comes into my mind. Maybe it's a thought about some old girlfriend or some old embarrassing moment or some joyful moment. Now maybe I give all of my attention suddenly to that thought. Maybe I give all of my attention to that thought and I become very tight around that thought. Oh my God, I love that memory. Oh, I hate that memory, or whatever it is. So my intention, I've gone and I've given all of my energy to that thought. This release or tightness. I've now changed my experience of what I've put my awareness on. And then my overall awareness, my sphere of awareness, is then changed. And the path that I've gone down is now changing. So you can kind of imagine, if you just sort of sit there now and you slightly open and close your hands, or maybe you put your hands into two fists and you tightly squeeze. And you imagine what paths you go down as you squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. This is someone who's gripping so tightly to the steering wheel, they will try and dictate everywhere that they go. But what they will do is, if you grip the steering wheel too tightly, it judders. Oh my God, Or I just let go of the steering wheel altogether, and I don't know where it goes. Just goes wherever it goes, man. Or maybe I just find some sort of midway where I just sort of lightly hold my hands in some sort of, like I'm holding a butterfly. How would I hold a butterfly? I wouldn't squeeze the butterfly, it would die. If I open my hands, the butterfly flies away. Or maybe I just slightly hold it in a slightly soft way. Or maybe I just, maybe it'll stay, maybe it'll go. A bit more playful. So the skill, the dance, the delicate interaction that we have with this physical, non-physical, and now is being able to ever so slightly surf the waves of now, and we will ever so slightly be able to guide this ship. Always remembering, of course, that the majority of everything that we see around us, we have no control over. And the majority of everything that is within us, we have no control over. So the control element is very minuscule, but still substantial. So you are somehow always dictating exactly what will happen next, even though you have some minimal control over the available options of what is available to happen next. But actually, the real wisdom is realizing that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter whether you're rich or poor, or this or that, or tall or short, or in some kind of calamity, or in some kind of glorious life. Yes, these will have a different impact on you. Maybe you are in pain. Maybe you have some mental trauma. Maybe you, all sorts of variabilities, which, yes, objectively, probably nicer to have a more pleasant, more expansive, more freeing experience of life rather than a very restrictive or very traumatic or very painful experience. But in the end, you're not really in control of those things. So there's no point in really getting too preference-based about any of that. You get what you get. You arrive, stuff happens, you have good parents, bad parents, good body, bad body, good currency, bad currency, good passport, bad passport, whatever. You don't have much control over these things. Or you don't have any control, really. It's just, this is what the random life that happened to you, this is just what it was. If you're a tree, wherever that seed landed, you ain't going to be able to go very far after that. Maybe there was, some seedling that was flying through the air, and so there's some random possibility of where that tree might, sprout from. But once it's in the ground and then it comes to being, that seed is just happy it came into being, right? So you came into being. Maybe there were good nutrients, maybe there weren't, maybe there was good sunshine availability, maybe there wasn't. So you come into being and there's some happening. But then within that happening, those series of moments, those series of nows, then you have some control over kind of what I'm talking about, of realizing that you have very little say in what's just, come to happen, very little say in the random structure of the atoms that make up the body, that make up the mind, that make up the you of now. But you have some control to direct your attention to wherever you want to go, and within that focus of attention to be allowing, to be releasing of that moment, to allow things to be a bit. And then you guide your way like that. That's the skill, that's the dance, that's the You could say that's the way of a yogi, but that kind of makes it seem glamorized. It's not, it's just that's the way of whatever we are. There's no need to glamorize it or make it seem special or anything. It doesn't need to be some activity that only Buddha can do. But yes, Buddha explored this activity to some very successful level where Buddha managed to reach some state of really large, very large scale awareness. How did he do that? He did that purely by continuing to do this action that we call meditation, which is actually the action of allowing in that moment, that release. And then focusing his flashlight of awareness intentionally on things that would enable him to expand his sphere of awareness even further. So the intention and the release, creating a larger sphere of awareness. So let's get into this a bit deeper. So what is it that Buddha did that the rest of us are confused by, but would somewhat like to try a little bit of? Okay. Let's build a picture. Let's build a picture of the thing that we would talk about as the ocean of consciousness. So the ocean of consciousness is when we say ocean, we don't mean like it's made of water, but just as a metaphorical or analogous, some ocean of energy where there is either flowy, moving, harmonious energy. You can imagine the whole thing shimmering a bit and everything's very interconnected. And then within this, you can have some areas which get a bit clumped. There's kind of tension. And if you were to just touch any point of this ocean, imagine that every single point of this ocean has a resonance. So if you touch a certain point on this ocean, it will go ah or some kind of resonance based on whether it is in a flow state, so it's very free flowing, and in those very free flowing moments it goes just some pure I can't sing, I'm sorry, but some pure harmony resonance. And then some other bits which are a bit tangled, a bit knotted. There's tension there. What noise do they make? Some different noise. Okay, so this is the ocean of consciousness that all of us that experience consciousness somehow are interacting with and pulling down from, let's say. At the moment of birth, or sometime before birth, doesn't matter when, let's not get controversial about when consciousness arrives, but at some point, this physical and non-physical, they kind of, have some attraction towards each other. And now there is this young human that now has some sensation of being conscious. And you could say that human is drawing from this ocean of consciousness, and it's not drawing from the entirety of the ocean, it's drawing from some local part of that conscious ocean, that ocean of consciousness. And within that ocean of consciousness, like we said, there's some areas that are a bit more free-flowing and some areas that are a bit more knotted. So if that baby that comes into being is pulling from the bit that is a bit more knotted, the experience of that baby will instantly be a bit more tense. It will just have an experience that's a bit more... Whereas if it comes from a part of the ocean that is a bit more harmonious, a bit more flowy, it will come down and it will have an experience that feels a bit more like, oh. And that baby hasn't chosen that baby hasn't done anything, it's just what's happened. Okay, baby comes into being, life happens. Sure, being a baby is stressful anyway, right? First few breaths, very, very painful, a lot of crying and, whatever. And then maybe this baby has nice, loving parents that take it home and look after it, give it breasts, it's breastfed for the first 2 years and, nice, calm, peaceful environment, fine. Then, this baby, even if it started off with the, at least now it's sort of, somewhat, maybe some of that will have been slightly smoothed out. I don't know. Or maybe it started off with the harmony and just carried on with harmony. Or maybe it came out into a family that was very, I don't know, just not so harmonious. Maybe there's just a lot of noise around. Maybe the baby doesn't get fed breast milk. Maybe it just gets fed some, manufactured stuff from the store because maybe the mum dies and then he doesn't have access to this. Maybe the mother's alive but doesn't really want to do the breastfeeding and the baby has to, consume some very sort of toxic alternative. Maybe there's a older brother that keeps on hitting it, or maybe there's all sorts. Maybe it just lives in a more noisy, chaotic environment, and the result of that will just be more tension, more micro moments of tension. So all you need to think about in terms of being a human is the now. Nothing else happens. You don't live by the day or by the week or by anything. You just live in single moments of now. And in every single moment of now, am I being encouraged to be tense or am I being encouraged to being relaxed, release? And of course, there might be some moments that are really dramatic, really heightened, oh my God, big drama. Now, those are really quite serious trauma points, but they're quite rare. They might be common for some, but generally speaking, they'll be rare. But for a lot of people, there'll be these micro trauma, micro tension points. They don't have to use the word trauma if that's triggering for people and then gets people into all sorts of things. Let's just talk about tension. So the kind of moments of big tension, those would be like, oh my God, your leg got chopped off, or, or maybe we get beaten up by sort of 10 kids in the playground, or, all sorts of things, all sorts of big trauma, or, parent dies, a sibling dies, all sorts of things. But really, those are rare. Mainly, it's just micro tension points. So that's why I'm saying, if you live in a very noisy environment, where there's all this chaos, all this noise, and it's constantly going, and you're just tightening. All these tightening moments. And over the course of a lifetime, you will have a lot of these tightenings because, we've grown up in we've evolved in an environment where there are things to be scared of. The dark. We're quite scared of the dark. We're scared of noises in the dark. We're scared of the potential for there being a dangerous animal in the dark. We're actually, as it turns out, we're now sort of scared of being unsuccessful in the social domain, not climbing up the social hierarchy, being shamed for being weak, or being shamed for being a loser, or being shamed for wearing the wrong clothes in some specific social circumstance where you were supposed to wear that kind of clothes. All of these kind of things. Now, of course, it's not like you go through your whole life just grabbing all these tensions and building up. You will also get moments where you get to release this tension. So, maybe you'll get to laugh a lot, and every time you laugh, you get to release some tension. Maybe you'll get to watch some sad films, and then when you watch these sad films, you cry, and then you release out tension that way. And every time you go to sleep, you get to allow some of this tension to be released. But of course, then if you don't get enough sleep, then maybe you don't get enough of this release. So you're constantly building up tension, releasing tension, building up tension, releasing tension. Over the course of a lifetime, you can imagine that some people will have a bit more of a deficit one way or the other. Maybe they had a lot of tension, but not quite enough release, and now they're just a bit tense. Maybe they had a little bit of tension, but a lot of release, and actually they're just really fucking chill. it won't really be there doing either way. Eventually, like Buddha, there's the example of someone who intentionally realizes that if I intentionally make this effort to release in the moment, to observe this moment, and then make an effort to observe certain things, then yeah, maybe you can make some progress on this. So now we come to the how to heal. So we observe this truth of this tension that generates some different sensation, changes the size of your sphere of awareness. If you are more tense, the sphere of awareness will be much smaller, and then you'll be more dominated by the thoughts and the emotions and the physical world. And if you are less tense, you've been fortunate to have a less tense life, or at least you've had tension there, but then you had enough time to release the tension with lots of sleep and lots of laughter, and maybe just days where there wasn't quite so much going on. Then, yeah, your sphere of awareness will be a bit bigger, and then you'll have the opportunity to observe yourself more, and therefore you probably have had the opportunity to help release some of the tension even more. So let's come on to that. So the activity of meditation and the activity of self-healing, intentional self-healing. So again, the activity of self-healing is a bit confusing because you're not really doing it yourself. What you are really doing is you are giving the opportunity for the healing to take place. And when we say healing, what do we really mean? Release of tension. That's really all we're ever talking about. When we exercise the body in a yoga kind of way, generally what we're doing is we're putting the body into certain positions and then encouraging, allowing the body to naturally ease its way into a slightly more stretched out way, right? So you don't just lie down and go to sleep, and you don't strain yourself. Let's say you bend over and try and touch your toes. Now, what is the right way to try and touch your toes quickly? Don't strain and strain and strain and strain, because you won't be able to do it for very long. You might get to somewhere, but no. And equally, if you just sort of just hang without making any effort to touch your toes, then you're getting nowhere. So you do a little bit of effort. You bend over a little bit more than just to a little bit of the pain and the pressure, and then you just kind of allow. So it's the same with the mind. So if we were to go quiet now, I was to stop talking, you were to just be. After some time, you might find that your mind naturally goes to something a bit uncomfortable. Maybe a thought that's a bit uncomfortable. Maybe a part of your body that's a bit uncomfortable. But yeah, there might be some discomfort. Very likely there'll be some discomfort. It's generally the comment that people make about meditation, is that there's some discomfort. So you've released some of that tension. Your sphere of awareness has got bigger. You're now observing. There is this consequence of observation. And then there might be the occurrence of some pain. And within that occurrence of some pain, there is then the choice. And this is where we come to the free will, the choice of intention, of you now have this flashlight of awareness, and it has naturally gone somewhere. So actually, you don't really need to worry too much about intentionally shining this flashlight too much. Always soft control. but you've now gone quiet, and now some pain, some tension has surfaced into your now. It's not really surfaced in any way, it's just it was there, you just weren't really paying attention. You're now a bit quieter, it's there. What do you do about it? You don't have to do very much. But what you can do is just continue to stay there and continue to shine this light of awareness on this pain. Maybe the pain intensifies a bit. Maybe it turns into something else altogether. Maybe whatever the original thought, the discomfort, boredom that was there, it then goes a bit deeper. It then starts turning into some other thought, some other darker, scarier thought you've not thought about for a very long time. So every difficult emotion you experience, you are observing the releasing of some tension. That's what you are observing. Something has been snagged. And the more you sit with that unpleasant emotion, the more you shine that torch of awareness on that discomfort, the longer you can sit in that discomfort, the more tension will be released. And that is the activity. There's not really another activity. That is it. Why did Buddha reach a point where he didn't have any tension left? Because he had the courage to continue to observe the discomfort. He continued to sit with the discomfort in his mind again and again and again and again. But what is that? You start by releasing, just allowing the moment to be. Whatever tension there was, you just release it a little bit. You're now a bit more intimately in this moment, in the now, not so distracted, not caught up in the distraction. So you've given some focus to, that activity of, oh yes. Now you're here. And then whatever you find here is just the consequence of whatever you are. If there is no tension, then there won't be that much discomfort. If there is a lot of tension, there will be discomfort. And maybe there is too much discomfort, and then you have to back away, and that's okay. You don't have to sit and do this meditation thing and heal all your, wounds, but it's available. It's available for you to do. And in terms of this balance, this balance of how much tension you have in your life and how many moments of release you have in your life that will result in whatever you are in every single moment, and therefore how likely you are to react in a certain way, and therefore how likely your decisions are to be dominated by tightness, dominated by physical things of this world, physical, I guess I'm talking about desires are something of this world. A very easy thing to do if you're curious to go and find your tensions is observe your desires. Desires are a manifestation, an outcome of tension. When you are hungry, you desire food. Why are you hungry? Because your body is saying, go and get some food. So there is some tension in your body. There's some tension in your mind around the non-harmonious state of your body. Your body needs some nutrients. It needs some sustenance. It needs some energy. So now there is some tension in your body. So then your body then sends the signal to your brain, and then your brain then has some desire. Now that's okay. That's a reasonable thing. But what about boredom? Most of the times that we're eating out of boredom. We're very, we eat far more, than we really need. We live quite sedentary lifestyles, so we don't really need so much food. So mainly we're just eating out of boredom. Or maybe we're eating out of emotion. We're eating out of, I'm a bit unhappy, I'm a bit depressed, so I'll eat. All these things. So all these tensions that then give rise to some desire, which then give rise to some action. It's very interesting if you just go and observe your desires. You will learn a lot about your tensions. But either way, the activity is always the same, which is allow yourself to find these tension points. They will occur every day. Something will happen that either causes you to feel annoyed or overly happy, either grabbing at the moment, hoping it stays longer, or pushing the moment away, not wanting it to be there. These are both from a state of tension. And then within that, then you can go and explore. And maybe then you allow yourself to observe, and even just that action of observing, which is the consequence of releasing, that gives the availability for things to flow a bit more. And that is all you're trying to do. You're just trying to allow things to flow. Allow things to flow, allow things to flow. So then there is less tension, then there is less tension there, and that's it. You don't need to worry too much about doing very much. You don't need to worry too much about whether you're doing the healing right or wrong. You don't need to worry too much about how quickly you're releasing these tensions. No, just observe. Like, if you want to speed up the release of the tension, sure. Then go and just sit down quietly for a few months, and all of these unpleasant emotions will just surface. And they're not surfacing for any particular reason other than just they are there. That tension is there. And therefore, when you sit and stop distracting yourself, naturally, these tensions, somehow, there is a natural mechanism in this plane of reality that we live in, where things that are in a state of tension will naturally try and move back to a state of harmony if they're allowed. So when you stop running around, these tension points, they are there to trying to move back to a state of harmony, so then they will do that. And all you have to do is let it. The visual metaphor I have is that we live inside this beautifully warm ocean. And for those of us that live with significant amounts of tension, it is like we are living inside an ice chamber. The ice chamber is the representation of your tension, and you live inside of this. And the activity of meditation is ever so slightly opening the door. And when you do that, when you ever so slightly open that door, the warm ocean comes into your ice chamber. And it won't melt the ice instantly, but it will slowly. The more you open the door, the more ice will melt. Now, what is your task? Your task is first open the door. So that is the release. Rather than holding the door shut, okay, I'll allow the door to open. The door wants to open. So all I have to do is let the door open. And then once I've opened the door, I will then feel the discomfort of warm versus cold. I am cold. I am in tension. The warm ocean comes in. I will feel discomfort as my ice chamber begins to melt. This will be uncomfortable. My only task is to keep that door open. How do I do that? I don't need to do anything. I just need to sit there and allow it. So there you go. I don't know how easy this is for people to grasp or understand, but what I'm trying to get across is that it's ever so simple. The only activity is to allow, is to release, is to allow that door to open. And then once you've done that, accept that there will be discomfort. Accept that there will be this warm against cold friction. And the discomfort that you are observing and experiencing is the positive release of tension. And all you are trying to do in this life is allow this tension to release. And the more you do that, the more you encourage this releasing of tension in the moment, the freer you will feel. And your choices will change as a result. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that your choices will move you towards what you think is the right path for you. You might be very focused on making money. Money is what? Money is part of this physical world. So, it's part of the thought-based world. It's part of the egoic-based world of fear. So it might be that as you have more tension in your mind, in your body, the choices you make then move you towards making more money. So you train a child to be very fear-based, to be very ambitious. Ambition is a kind of fear-based structure. That child will make decisions that will move it towards making more money. And that is what we have decided in this physical world is success. Okay. But the experience of that child might not be a very pleasant experience, might be an experience of lots of tension. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's just a thing. I don't know. You tell me. Have you experienced great tension? Have you experienced great release? These are two different experiences. Which experience would we like to encourage our children to have? You tell me. So it's not that you will start making decisions that will make you lots of money necessarily. That's the wrong way to look at it. But you will start making decisions that are different from a different basis. And if you do want to make money, then you'll find that actually you're in a better foundational place to find a path, stick with a path, and in a more harmonious way, make your way towards some goal. But the point being is that if you can get to a point of less and less tension, it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter where you're going. It doesn't matter where you end up. It doesn't matter what the outcome is, because we only live life by moments. So the journey is always the activity. The activity is the now. So if in this single now you're in a state of tension, then there is tension. It doesn't matter where you get to. If the experience in this moment is one of softness and lightness, then there is softness and lightness. It doesn't matter wherever you went from or got to. It's only the now that matters. Now, of course, if you're running from a tiger, it's probably better that you put yourself into a state of tension to get the fuck out of there. Otherwise, you'll get eaten or die. You'll get maimed, you'll get scratched at, you maybe get, hand bitten off. Those are difficult experiences. So knowing when to apply this state of tension is really important. But what humans have been driven to, and now we get on to the point about the issues with modern living, this modern urban experience, this modern urban life, is that it's put us in a regular state of tension because we are eating strange foods that are making our bodies be more in a state of tension, either through too much sugars, too much inflammation, jagged edges, those jagged crisps, and clogging up your digestive system. Bread will do that. White, those highly processed things. So every time you're eating, you're generally putting your body into some state of distress, and puts a little bit more tension into that scenario. The lifestyles that we lead, we're not moving very much, so we're not allowing our body to release the natural tension that would build up in our muscles, in the way that our body needs to move. And it's not that it's not that there's any good or bad here. It's just our body has evolved to to be a certain way. It's actually our body has evolved to adapt to the lifestyle that body was living. And this body has been living a certain lifestyle for many millions of years, going back through monkeys and beyond. And the body has just adapted to that lifestyle, that diet. If we'd grown up on a diet of, eating pebbles, then our body will be very good at digesting pebbles. But our body has not evolved to eat pebbles, so if you eat a pebble, it won't be very good at digesting it. In the same way that we've not actually evolved to eat a, highly processed hot dog. So our body is not very good at digesting a highly processed hot dog. It's not that hot dogs are bad, it's just not what our bodies evolved to consume. So our diet is very misaligned, and therefore we are putting our bodies into some sort of state of tension and distress, and that then distresses our mind. We're not having the lifestyles that we're used to living. Our bodies have adapted to a lifestyle of moving, of hanging, of moving through trees or walking across savannas. So we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing either of those things now. We're often sitting on sofas in quite an unnatural position. We're not squatting anymore. So our body is in an imperfect state. And then we're now living in these very large communities, which is not our natural way of living at all. We are now living in these communities that really make us feel very alone. So our mind has evolved to be, to survive and thrive in whatever environment this mind was living in. And our mind has evolved in a scenario of apes for the last many millions of years in small communities of 10, 20, 50, 100, probably no more than 200. That would be a very large community, but certainly not 1,000. Oh, no, when would that have happened? When was the first time that our brain had to cope with being in a community of more than 1,000 other similar life forms? Well, relatively recently, given the amount of time and the slowness of evolution, but within the last 30, 40,000 years, probably had never been exposed and had to survive and thrive in a community of more than 1,000. And now we live in communities of 10,000, 100,000, million, more than 1 million. These aren't communities, these are just swarms of humans. And within this swarm, then we just get lost. And if we'd evolved in communities of 1 million humans, then our mind would be adapted to that. But we didn't, so it's not. So then your mind is then put into a state of tension because it doesn't know how to deal with that, really. And actually one of the consequences of living in these very, very large communities is then that we've become hypersocial. In that I mean that we've become hyperegoic. In that I mean that we've had to build some personality, some construct of I-ness that then we use to try and survive in that environment. So we have a certain identity that we've created for ourselves. Then when we go into the workplace, we present ourselves, we wear certain clothes, we say, my name is this, I am this job title, I am these things. We do this in order to extract some money. This identity that we present in the workplace is often quite disconnected from who we actually feel that we are. And then we use this money to then have a home, which is a completely independent structure, financially and any other way, from the other people in this 1 million person community that we live in. So we are now, all of us, all of these 1 million different households, living completely independent and exclusive. The success of any one person of this 1 million does not then bring success to all the other million. It just brings success to that one person. If that one person is one family, that one household is able to extract a good amount of resources for themselves, then they get that. The people around them don't benefit necessarily. The people that they work with don't necessarily benefit. Maybe they do, but really, that's we are each of us living exclusive lives, not inclusive. So when we lived in a community of 100, if one person did well, that would probably benefit everyone around them. If one person learned a skill, then everybody would probably benefit from that. Maybe they would also learn that skill. If somebody was struggling, then probably people would move into assist. If somebody was sick, then people would move into assist. That was a collective, very inclusive environment. And that was the way that we lived as a species for many millions of years. We've not been just one species during that time, but there's just a continuation of life, a continuation of living, and more or less living a similar kind of way. And now we live a different way. So this modern way of living for a human is very unusual. Very unusual for our mind, very unusual for our body, very unusual for our digestive system. And it puts us in states of tension very regularly. So whatever that balancing scale of tension and release that we would all think about from earlier, we are now, all of us, in a situation where we are more likely than not to be more tense, and therefore more likely to make decisions based on that tension, which then leads us down pathways like eating McDonald's or drinking Coca-Cola or dating someone who's not appropriate for us, or buying things that we don't need, or taking jobs that we don't really want to do but we think we should. All sorts of decisions that don't really align with us, don't really lead us towards a happier, healthier, more harmonious existence. They actually lead us the other way. So now we're actually, every Coca-Cola that we buy because we're tense is actually going to lead us to more tension. Every pint of beer that we go and drink because we're tense is now going to lead us to more decisions based on tension that then leads us, it's a self-destructive cycle. So this is just how we find ourselves. It's not good or bad or right or wrong or horrific or glorious. It just is. Maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe people being in a state of tension or a state of, peace and harmony, maybe it doesn't really matter. In the end, we're just some small collection of life forms on a small rock hurtling around some big fiery sun thing. And there's shitloads of these sun things and shitloads of these rocks, and there's probably a lot of life out there. There's probably a lot of sentient life out there, maybe not very nearby to us, but, out there in this vast cosmos, with, what do they say, like 2 trillion galaxies, and in every galaxy there's some number of hundreds of billions of stars, and around those stars, like the numbers are massive. So sure, there's stuff out there, there's life out there, there's more sentience out there in some varying forms, and we're one of those. And we have this experience of living slightly unnatural lives that put us in great sort of increased states of tension, and that's about it. And there is this possibility, there is this option of observing, which you achieve by letting the moment be, which brings you into this moment, and now you're observing this moment. And by doing this action regularly, this activity we call meditation, you are able to then encourage the tensions that have been building up to slowly release. The experience of releasing is what we call emotion, discomfort emotion. And the longer you can sit and direct this flashlight of awareness on the discomfort that is there, and allow whatever needs to happen, you allow it to happen, allow the tension to release, you can then find yourself in a state where you're not in quite so much discomfort. And then in the end, it doesn't matter if there's discomfort. You can get to a point where you're chill with the discomfort. You're chill with the imperfection. You're chill with the desire to drink Coca-Cola. Maybe you're even chill with drinking the Coca-Cola and then feeling a bit sleepy afterwards. All these things. These are all options. And it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. You don't have to save everyone from this calamity that we live in. You don't need to rush around trying to return everyone into a state of community living. But you could. It's okay. If you feel driven to build a community, then sure, build a community. If you feel driven to go and help people heal from their tensions, then yeah, go and help them heal, but you don't have to. There's no demand on you. There's no must. You don't have to heal yourself. You don't have to meditate. You don't have to do any of these things. But these are all possibilities. These are all options. And I suppose that's the real point, that we don't have much control. We don't have much influence over this world. We can't think that we are so ridiculously powerful to dictate what will happen to anybody in the future, the past. It's all just what's happening. But for you, yes, there is control, there is power, there is free will, and it is only experienced in the moment. It's only experienced in this activity of inactivity, and then the consequence of that inactivity, which is observation, and then the consequence of that observation, which is discomfort, and then the choice to sit with that discomfort or not. And then the subsequent release of tension, which then, over time, if one continues to do that regularly, then maybe you reach a state where there is just less tension.